Let's go now to dimensions of multicultural education. James Banks also identified 5 dimensions of multicultural education. First dimension, content integration. The extent to which teachers employ examples and content from a variety of cultures and groups to illustrate fundamental concepts, principles, generalizations, and theories in their subject area or field is referred to as content integration. When this dimension is successfully applied, the injection of ethnic and cultural content into a subject area is logical and not artificial. Some academic areas have more chances for integrating ethnic and cultural content than others. Teachers can employ ethnic and cultural content to illustrate topics, themes, and principles in social studies, language arts, and music on a regular basis and in large quantities. There are additional opportunities to incorporate multicultural topics into math and science. They are, however, less plentiful than in social studies and language arts. Content integration is sometimes misunderstood by educators as encompassing all aspects of multicultural education and is consequently dismissed as unrelated to math and science instruction. The second dimension is the knowledge construction process. This process describes teaching activities that help students to understand, investigate, and determine how the implicit cultural assumptions, frames of references, perspectives, and biases of researchers and textbook writers influence the ways in which knowledge is constructed. Multicultural education entails not only incorporating ethnic content into the school curriculum, but also altering the structure and organization of information in the classroom. It also entails shifting teachers' and students' perspectives on and interactions with knowledge, assisting them in becoming knowledge producers rather than only consumers of knowledge which are generated by others. The knowledge building process explains why researchers' cultural identities and social situations must be considered when evaluating the validity of knowledge claims to teachers and students. According to multicultural theories, researchers' values, personal histories, attitudes, and beliefs are inextricably linked to the knowledge they produce. As a result, they reject positivist assertions of detached and disinterested knowledge production. They also dismiss the notion of producing information that is unaffected by the knowledge producer's cultural assumptions and social standing. Paradigms, ideas, and concepts that omit or misrepresent the lived experiences, histories, and contributions of oppressed groups are addressed in multicultural teaching and learning. Multicultural pedagogy aims to rethink and broaden the Western canon in order to make it more representational and inclusive of the country's diversity, as well as modify the frames of reference, views, and concepts that makes up school knowledge. The third dimension is prejudice reduction. It seeks to help students develop positive and democratic racial attitudes. Multicultural education's prejudice reduction component aims to assist pupils in developing positive and democratic racial views. It also enables pupils to comprehend how the context of schooling, as well as the attitudes and beliefs of dominant social groups, influence ethnic identification. Gordon Allport's 1954 theory has had a considerable impact on intergroup relations research and theory. He proposed that interracial interaction can lessen prejudice provided that the contact situations had the following characteristics. First, cooperative rather than competitive. Second, individuals have equal status. And the last one, the contact is sanctioned by authorities such as parents, principals, and teachers. The fourth dimension is an equity pedagogy. Teachers modifies their teaching in ways that will facilitate the academic achievement of students from diverse racial, cultural, socioeconomic, and language groups. This entails adopting a variety of teaching techniques and approaches that are consistent with the range of learning patterns among diverse cultural and ethnic groups, such as being tough but highly customized. It also includes using cooperative learning strategies into math and science curriculum to help students improve their academic performance. Students from many cultures and groups arrive to school with a variety of strengths, according to equity pedagogy. When an equity pedagogy is used, teachers conduct culturally sensitive teaching. They include significant components of their students' family and community culture into their instructional materials and activities. Ethnically diverse students' cultural knowledge, prior experiences, frames of references, and performance styles are also used by culturally responsive teachers to make learning encounters more meaningful and effective for them. The last dimension is an empowering school culture. This involves restructuring the culture and organization of the school so that students from diverse racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, and language groups experience equality. This component entails reorganizing the school's culture and organization so that pupils from various racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, and linguistic groups are treated equally. The culture and social structure of the school are examined and changed by members of the school personnel. Important variables that are examined and reformed include grouping and labeling practices, sports participation, achievement gaps between groups, different rates of enrollment in gifted and special education programs among groups, and the interaction of staff and students across ethnic and racial lines. The formation of genuinely diverse interactions among various groups inside schools is required for an empowering school system. Mutual and reciprocal tolerance for cultural differences is represented in school-wide goals, customs, and cultural practices. By giving teachers chances for collective planning and instruction, and by developing democratic structures that provide teachers, parents, and school employees shared responsibility for school governance. An empowering school structure enhances the practice of multicultural education. So these are the 5 dimensions of multicultural education that had been identified by James Banks.
Intercultural communication. One of the specific means of interaction in a globalized context is through communication, and for this, we also need to be familiar with the term intercultural communication. According to Beneath, 2018, it is the study and practice of communication across cultural contexts. It applies equally to domestic cultural differences such as ethnicity and gender, and to international differences such as those associated with nationality or world region. This definition means that two persons interacting do not need to have different nationalities for the scenario to be considered intercultural. As long as their fields of experience or background knowledge about the possible topics for interaction is based on group and not individual identities, then it can be assumed that their attempt to understand each other is within intercultural communication. Intercultural Communication Competence, or ICC. This is the ability to communicate effectively and appropriately in various cultural contexts. To give us a clear understanding of intercultural communication competence, let us read this article from the TESOL International Association blog. What is the intercultural communicative competence? Posted on 15 December year 2014 by Yilin Sun, the TESOL President's blog. In recent years, several researchers in the ELT field have raised a series of conceptual issues around how we should express our cultures in English. As a speaker, should you stick to your own way of thinking, or should you adapt to the listener's way of thinking? As a listener, should you impose your own way of thinking on the speaker, or should you be sensitive to and tolerant of the speaker's different way of thinking and speaking? Hannah, year 2005, shared a study that she and her colleagues conducted back in year 2000 using the following story. The story was told by an Australian to a Japanese professor. It took place in the office of a superintendent of the Hong Kong police force prior to year 1997. The superintendent was British and the constable was Chinese. There was a quiet knock at the door and in came a young Chinese police constable. He was of course wearing his uniform. He saluted the superintendent and stood smartly at attention in front of the large wooden desk. "Yes?" inquired the superintendent. "My mother is not very well, sir," started the constable. "Yes?" repeated the superintendent, beginning to frown. "She has to go into hospital, sir," continued the constable. "So?" "On Thursday, sir." The superintendent's frown was replaced by a look of exasperation. "What is it that you want?" he asked sternly. At this direct question, the constable's face fell and he simply mumbled, "Nothing, sir, it's all right," and turned and left the room. As soon as the door had closed, the superintendent turned to me and said, "You see, a classic case. They can't get to the point." "So what would you want him to say?" I asked. "Well, instead of beating around the bush, he should come straight to the point. He obviously wants some leave so he can look after his mother. He should ask for leave, and not waste my time going on about his poor mother. You want him to say something like, 'Can I have some leave, please, sir?'" "Yes, exactly," replied the superintendent. Hannah surveyed 138 students, asking them who they think was responsible for the communication breakdown in the interaction. 69% of the respondents expressed sympathy with the Chinese constable who used a common Chinese way of making a request in English. They believed that it was the British superintendent, not the Chinese constable, who was responsible for the communication breakdown because he was not able to accept the Chinese style even though he perfectly understood what his interlocutor said and meant. If this exchange happened among two non-native English speakers, for example, a Chinese and a Hispanic speaker, the outcome would be very different. Chinese said, "My mother is not very well, sir." Then the Hispanic said, "Oh, you must be worried. Would you want to take a leave and take care of your mother?" Very often, non-native speakers of English deviate from American or British norms of communication and thereby understand each other and establish rapport. They could communicate with each other better when they did not follow the native speakers' norms than when they did. These studies show that when teaching intercultural communicative competence, teachers need to teach both the local and international cultures. There are 5 effective intercultural communication requires. The empathy is an understanding of other people's behaviors and ways of thinking. Respect, a genuine admiration and appreciation of different ways of thinking and communication. Tolerance is the ability and willingness to accept and acknowledge different behaviors and ways of thinking, the existence of opinions or behavior that one does not necessarily agree with. Sensitivity is the awareness and responsiveness to other people's behaviors and ways of thinking. Flexibility, willingness to adapt and open to change and different ways of thinking.
So that's it for today's lesson. For further information, please read Topic 3, 21st Century Literacies, Globalization, and Multicultural Literacy. Thank you!